Welcome to FoodTech Stories. I'm your host, Megan Thomas, a marketing and communications expert who is focused on how emerging technology is adopted in food and agriculture. On each episode, we talk with leaders, innovators, and storytellers who are shaping the future of our food and food system. If you value our content, please consider subscribing. Today, my guest is Damien Perriman, who is Chief Commercial Officer for eXoZymes. Welcome to the podcast, Damien.
Thanks, Megan. G'day.
Tell us more about how you got started in your career.
Maybe my accent might give it away a little bit. I grew up in Australia, which you don't encounter all the time. There's a few of us scattered around. I actually grew up in the outback of Australia, and so sort of growing up was always exposed to this importance of using resources wisely, because in the outback, you don't have a lot to work with. It's sort of no surprising for my career that I should be in a role where I can commit myself to renewables and to sustainability. There was sort of a formational part of my career when I joined Dow AgroSciences, Dow Chemical, and it was sort of at this time where a new focus was going into renewables and what role would it play for the future of petrochem and the future of big ag. That kind of formed a lot of sort of the foundational thoughts I had for how the world was going to embrace this really, really important and necessary change.
And when did you move to the States?
I moved to the States right around 2000, just after the Sydney Olympics, which was massive. It was beautiful. It was incredible. And so I was charged up coming out of university. The idea that I could have my own Olympic moment by taking my career and just going overseas.
I remember watching those Olympics. They were beautiful. What led you to eXoZymes, and tell us how long you've been there?
Yeah, I've been with eXoZymes for just on a year now. And this is really, for me, trying to find a way to make more impact with biology, with biotechnology. I'd spent sort of the previous 20 years working in symbio, working in green chemistry, developing disruptive methods to use biology to make products that we need in everyday life. The challenge we would run into again and again was scale. I was fortunate enough to be able to bring a few products and a few technologies into market, but we buried a lot of our colleague companies along the way that just didn't have that persistence or didn't have the right capital structure, or they just ran out of runway. What that teaches you, maybe in a post-traumatic situation, is that if you're a tech company or a startup company that doesn't have a laser-like focus on getting to market quickly and generating an investor return, then what game are you in? What brought me to eXoZymes was seeing there was a technology that could marry into this strategy of move fast. It isn't a company that wants to go and solve the world's biggest problem. It wants to solve a meaningful problem, but we want to do it quickly because that's how we'll generate a return for our investors. And Megan, if there's one takeaway for tech when it comes to this whole space is when you delight your investors, they might invest again in the next thing. If you don't delight them, they're taking their money and they're walking. We got to make sure that more investment comes into this category because everything we do is incredibly meaningful for what we need in the future of this earth and for the future of civilization as we know it. We take enzymes out of a living cell and we make them operate as a pathway completely free of the cell's regulatory environment. It's like a cascade, and that pathway takes a relatively benign, simple biomass feedstock. And we go through sort of multiple conversions to create a complex yet important molecule at the end of that pathway. By taking it out of the cell is no longer needing to make all of these byproducts, or the cell is not focused on growing. The cell's not fighting you to get productivity into your pathway. You can just focus on the pathway. Being able to focus just on the pathway takes away one of the key bottlenecks we encountered so frequently before in scaling some things up. So what the company is doing is unleashing these pathways on a whole new broad catalog of interesting pharmaceutical and nutraceutical products that we can develop very, very quickly.
And do you think of yourselves as a product company or a platform company?
I think we started as a platform company. Many companies do, because the first thing you discover is, hey, we've got a breakthrough. What do we do with it? Well, while we figure out what we want to do, we'll be a platform company. And a lot of early investors want to invest in a platform company because they know that if the first product doesn't hit, there's an opportunity to build more products. And also a platform company is there to possibly service other people's needs. I was attracted to eXoZymes because it was right at the sort of defining point of transitioning out of being a platform and into being a products company. My thesis, if I want to take investor money, is I want to take investor money and I want to unleash a product. When you can put something in people's hands or you can put it inside their body, you're going to make an impact that can be measured. You're going to create something that there is a real market pull for. You don't get that with a platform. You only get that with products. eXoZymes very much today is a products company with a lead product in the metabolic health nutraceutical category. And we've got other candidates in our pipeline, like for fragrances or for other nutraceuticals that we're really, really excited about.
And what can you tell us about that metabolic health product?
About a year ago, almost to the day, we started working on this new process to make a compound called NCT. NCT is one of these sort of hard to make natural products that exist only in sort of vanishingly small amounts in nature, but has been the subject of some preclinical studies by research groups who appreciate its role in regulating a really, really important metabolic switch, which controls mitochondrial function and growth. Here's a compound that we already knew has desirable performance for treating conditions like obesity and fatty liver disease, because that was established in the preclinic, but it never got commercialized because no one could figure out how to make it. As we look at our industry, we'll understand what are the molecules the world needs, not just today, but also in the future, and find really, really efficient, sustainable, and investment-worthy approaches of actually being able to get to those molecules.
Are you focused on the US market, or how wide are you focused?
I think we're only limited by how many hours we can spend on a plane. Is when you think about a compound like NCT serving sort of this nutraceutical metabolic health market, nutraceuticals are a very strong market in the United States, but addressing metabolic health and wellness is a global issue. It's easy to have partnering conversations right here domestically, but when we go to conferences and we meet with people, it's a theme that everyone's interested in. We're a global company, but really only limited by how much money we can spend on travel and time we want to spend on the plane.
Time can be that limiting constraint.
100%.
Unlike many of the firms that I have the opportunity to speak with, the leaders of those firms, eXoZymes is a publicly traded company. Why did the company dealership decide to take the company public?
I joined the company just after the IPO. This is after sort of 20 years of being into the venture-backed world where everything you dreamed of was reaching a certain level of maturity where you can go IPO and you can create that liquidity and everyone celebrates. You get to take a breather and try it all over again. For eXoZymes, the IPO was not the end of the journey, it was the beginning. Why did we go IPO instead of taking the traditional venture capital route? We identified that there are investors out there who really want to participate in these types of companies and these types of technologies, but they're not a part of the venture capital system. Listing on the NASDAQ and going through that journey, and we worked with an incredible partner called MDB Capital who invested in eXoZymes before the IPO, helped build the systems within the company, and then was the underwriter for that process. Through that relationship, we're able to access and sort of an installed community of investors that cared passionately about our story because they stepped into it. It gives us access to new capital, but that capital has a very different focus to traditional venture capital. And I think as you and I were sort of chin-wagging there at Future FoodTech.
We did. That's where we met.
I shared with you, hey, and we're public. It's like the eyes like, what? Why? Well, it's sort of this opportunity to change from being a cool story-driven narrative, which I think the venture capital community wants to latch onto. They want a platform with an incredible big picture narrative. And now we're working with investors who care less about the narrative and it's more about the numbers. And I think what that does for an early stage company, if you want to put it in your playbook as an entrepreneur, if you really do believe in your platform and you know you've got a technology that's good, what you really want is less focus on story and sort of more focus on that disciplined milestones that will drive you to sort of delivery and to success. A lot of that gets missed when you have venture capital sitting around the boardroom table with you when you're doing your quarterly board meetings, and it's more operationally focused and like, what's everything that the company's doing? How are we driving the valuation up so that in 2 years we can do a whole new fundraising event and the story's going to change and the management's going to change and everything's going to change. The cadence is very different. Being public is literally, while we were talking, an investor was calling my cell phone. I'm glad I had it on silent. They want to know, where's the milestones? I want to know what the next milestone is, and I want you to be able to give me a quantified score of how you're going against that milestone, because they want to know their money is sitting in the right place. And if it's not, well, they have that freedom of choice. They go find different investment for them to put their money into. But that's sort of the beauty of this market, is being able to work with individuals like this who are otherwise not investing their money into opportunities like this.
I previously had worked with CRISPR and gene editing and was with the startup I was using that. And I know there was always a lot of social media chatter about investors who wanted to participate in the potential that that technology had in different sectors. So very interesting. What changed for the way that the team is running the company after it went public?
The first thing that we had to do was a little bit of an education, not just for us, but for our investors and our partners, that the IPO was not the end, it was the beginning. The IPO was not about creating liquidity, it was about access to capital that was milestone-driven capital. Milestone-driven capital demands clear understanding about what the milestones are and how you are performing against those milestones. Now, that's a little bit of a challenge for an early stage company because you don't always have the answers. You can't always predict what's happening in the next 3 months. I'm running an experiment. It might be a good result. It might be a negative result. We had to learn, and we still are learning, the language of being able to communicate to our investors that gives them that transparency and that trust that they're looking for. But at the same time, we're still experimenting and we're still learning. That learning journey, sort of warts and all, isn't necessarily something you want to just kind of open up to anyone who can look at it. We need to kind of strike that very, very careful and important balance.
I think that's one of the key differences between an early stage company, whether public or private, versus a more mature business, is that you have history in a mature business. You generally know how things are going to go. You know which factors, extrinsic factors may impact that. There is that kind of exciting but uncertain in terms of what's going to happen in the near term. Did you also find that that was a heavy kind of reporting lift? Did you need to put new procedures and tools in place to deliver on that level of reporting that was now expected, or how did that change?
I thought it was going to be. I was in a public officer role before I joined eXoZymes, right, which was a much more mature company who had gone like their traditional VC, and then the IPO was the exit. The difference between a venture-backed organization and what I'm doing now from a reporting perspective, it doesn't feel like it's any more workload. I think maybe that's sort of one of the things that I feared being a private venture-backed executive was that, the moment we go IPO, there's going to be all these systems and it's going to be a much, much heavier lift. That's not true. I think we put the effort into getting the systems in place before the IPO, and that made it easy. But also, we do a ton of video recording. Us leaders, we sit down and we record a video for our investors to say, hey, here's what's going on. And that's so easy to disseminate and distribute that information that it's kind of a nice, effective, low effort way of just being able to keep the cadence of sharing out going, which we didn't do much of. We didn't fully exploit much of. And I actually think companies should exploit it a lot more than they do.
How interesting. I would have anticipated it would have been a heavier lift as well. As someone who thinks about messaging and communications as part of my work, video is a very powerful way to tell a story because the folks watching can get a sense of you as a person or the team. It delivers on a much deeper level than simply reading or hearing something. I'm glad to hear you've found that worked out. How is eXoZymes going to market? How are you approaching customer acquisition or partnership development?
Joining eXoZymes was one part technology, but another part takes sort of 20 years of learning and strategy and deploy it. When you're a science organization, focus on the science, become really, really good at the science. And if you can be really, really quick at the science, then you can kind of create this flywheel of opportunity. Where a lot of companies get bogged down is they develop a platform because that's what the venture investors want. Then they develop a product because the venture investors realize you actually need it. And then they find it hard to identify where in the market that product's going to drop. So then they start commercializing that product themselves. And in the end, there's sort of a 20-year journey and you've done everything and you've delighted no one. We want the company to focus on being the science and have a really disciplined endpoint. We'll go from idea to a commercial scale ready tech transfer package that's been validated at a CMO, that has qualified CMO networks, that's able to produce that material with a qualified supply chain that we know the price and the quality of the raw materials that will go into that operation. That's what we deliver. Now, in parallel, we create these commercial vehicles, but they are their own company. They have their own team, have their own investors, build their own partnerships. They have their own culture, and their focus is to commercialize, to take a product into market. Our discipline of building process technology, knowing how to go fast, break through, is different to the capabilities needed to drive a product into the marketplace. We're creating that separation, but you've got to do it in a way that's fair and that's motivating. Creating these commercial vehicles, our greed factor is not about trying to hold on to as much of that as we possibly can. Our greed factor is driven by that, if successful, helps to underwrite the value of the next thing that we're working on, which will be that better informed from the previous experience that we had. And we communicate this to our investors. It's what our investors expect. Our investors expect that this is going to be a portfolio company. That's what they're putting their money into. Those commercial vehicles, we have to gear them to quickly pick up this technology and run into the marketplace because they're building our market cap to go and develop the next generation of opportunity.
Very interesting. Sounds very sophisticated. Is there a specific trigger that you look for to understand when you shift from the more scientific mindset to the commercialization mindset?
When we get material for the first time that's in sufficient quantity and quality, that we can start driving what I would call sort of prototyping or usage studies of the material. Now it's time to start build that commercial vehicle. In a few more months, we'll be finished optimizing that process and it'll be ready for tech transfer, which will take a few months. We'll need 6 months to build that commercial vehicle. So we have to go and start it right now when we get to that point. If you're following our milestones, with NCT, the compound we mentioned back at the beginning for metabolic health, it took us 11 months to go from idea to pilot scale production, which happened just before Christmas time last year.
That's quite quick.
Stupidly quick. So damn quick. At the business side of the organization's going, crap, we got to catch up. We're not used to seeing the technology move this fast. And now we've got to run to build the commercialization side around it. That's kind of this sort of incredible take-through of breakthrough and sell-free is just the speed at which you can move. But now we've got to drive the discipline of the commercial vehicle, what comes next for that opportunity.
That's a great problem to have. I want to go all out versus being behind schedules. What has surprised you the most about your tenure with the company over the last year?
I mean, it's a great culture. I couldn't be happier with the organization. Being in science and tech for as long as I have, culture is really, really important. People who are daring to sort of tackle the status quo, people who are daring to experiment on something that hasn't been done before. That's sort of risky, right? You can be brave to do something like that. Culture is important for that environment of discovery and breakthrough to happen. The culture at eXoZymes is absolutely incredible. Also, the other thing that surprised me, as I mentioned, is just how quickly the R&D cycles have moved. We use AI to help with our designing, to learn and to grow upon our experimental database and to help predict what the next changes are that we need to make. That's rapidly increasing the cycle times upon which we're moving towards the desired outcome. But here's the big takeaway for me, as a chemist, that's where my grounding is. The first time we ran this product at pilot scale and I saw the GCMS trace of the composition to see what type of impurity profile did we have with the material. We had a single product peak. It wasn't a mishmash of other stuff. It was just one peak. And I was like, did someone make that up? I've never seen something like that before. I've had to fight against byproducts. I've had to fight against derivatives that kind of get formed in the downstream recovery chemistry. To see a single super, super clean peak made sense, knowing that basically it's a catalytic reaction, but it's happening through a sequence of enzymes. In my experience, scaling up fermentation-based systems for many, many years, you get to scale and you discover an impurity that causes everything to smell bad, or you get an impurity that turns everything yellow. You're fighting against all of these impurities and all these byproducts. Not having that was our life just got so much easier.
I would have to say that you were the first person I've had as a guest who grew up in the outback. As you mentioned, that's a unique and rugged environment. How do you think that experience shaped how you lead today?
I dare you to find another Australian that grew up in the outback. They're around, right? I'm related to several of them. It taught us a little bit of irreverence for the status quo. When you're in an environment where you don't have the access to unlimited resources, you don't have exposure to every opportunity, you're not working with the systems that elsewhere are working with, you tend to feel like you're going to just make it up. I feel most comfortable in designing a system than I do feel learning a system, which can seem inefficient, but it's where the best creativity happens. Growing up in the outback of Australia, the thing that does condition us to do is to be a little bit irreverent towards the status quo. We're not afraid to tear it down and build it back up again. We're happiest when doing so.
What a great mindset to have when you're involved in a scaling startup. Who knows what's around the corner?
You sit across the boardroom table from the partners you're trying to build relationships with or the investors that you're speaking to, and they're imagining what incredible poise this person has, patience and sort of wisdom for the way the system works. No, we're just sitting here plotting how we're going to tear it down and build it back up again.
That's so funny. What do you see as ahead for the biotech, ag tech, food tech sector writ large?
Being industrial biotechnology for as long as I had, it was always this vision of sort of marrying agriculture to the chemical industry, taking petro out of the picture and sort of marrying these two worlds together. We struggled so much early on in just creating a common language whereby the feedstock side can talk about these are the types of feedstocks we can make at these types of price points. They can unlock this type of biology. And on the chemical side, we're used to pricing feedstocks and buying feedstocks in a different way. And we're looking for this type of functionality. Connecting the two dots took a lot of people and a lot of sort of coming together and storming around to create that common language. When I first started pitching metabolic engineering to make chemicals to the industry at large, I probably did 150 non-disclosure agreements in an 18-month period. Everyone wanted to know what it was going to do, but no one really understood what to do with it. Today, you wouldn't need to do that because every big company has a department of their own to understand how to engineer biology to make products. It's such a sort of commonplace function these days. Things change and things evolve. What I see as the potential going forward now is being able to rapidly turn the R&D engine to get to solutions much more quickly means the investment needed to do it has come down by an order of magnitude. The product opportunities we can be thinking about don't have to be so massive and so large in their impact. You don't need the volume to pay back your investment on R&D. That now means we can start looking at a whole class of really interesting molecules that were previously underserved. I think the best place to go looking are those natural molecules that we already know do something. Because a lot of people have studied nature to look for active biological materials to solve one problem or another, but couldn't do anything with it because there wasn't a method of making those materials. So those natural molecules, natural means there's a pathway to make them and we can take them into a cell-free system to make them. Natural because they've been heavily looked at and we find those ones with the unique performance features that will create a valuable solution if you can make it. And that's what we go after. They don't have to be biofuels with massive, massive global impact and volume because the R&D cycle cost is like an order of magnitude smaller than it once was. This is a turning point for our industry in our ability to kind of serve really interesting business cases that are molecule driven into spaces that people haven't looked at before.
That's a very insightful answer about what's ahead for the sector. I found that very enlightening. Damien, thank you for sharing.
And hopefully we can command a good share of it. There's so many natural products out there that we know do something, but we haven't been able to make. The more the merrier, because it's going to do nothing but sort of float the industry at large.
And as biotech has advanced and AI applications have advanced, it is really that unique inflection point where we can start to really change how some of these things are happening in terms of the ability to do it, but certainly the time aspect as well.
Can you imagine if back in those days I was describing when we're trying to get the biologists to talk to the chemists and we're trying to create that common language? If we had AI tools then, that would have been one meeting done. Okay, now we can talk to one another instead of years.
Yeah, absolutely. I worked with a company that was working on a pitless cherry, and to do it achieve a pitless cherry through conventional breeding would have taken 100 years. But with emerging CRISPR technology, it can be done potentially in about 10 to 15 years.
Isn't that amazing? I once met a guy who'd been working on sugarcane traits down in Brazil. We were having a banquet because one of the traits he started working on as a PhD was finally being deployed into the field for the very, very first time. And it was also his retirement party at the same time. It was a big celebration.
I bet he was excited, but yeah, that's a great story.
Life's work.
Literally a life's work. How can people find out more about the work of eXoZymes?
Come look at us on LinkedIn. We spend a lot of our airwave on pushing stories and pushing comments and content out via LinkedIn. Our NASDAQ stock ticker is eXoZ, or as my colleagues like to say, eXoZ. Check that out. It's a great way of sort of following what we're doing and what we're saying. That's our website, eXoZymes, eXZYMES. And the eXoZymes is our new vernacular because we're a company that engineers enzymes, but we engineer them to function outside of exo, the cell, hence eXoZymes.
Very descriptive. Thank you. Well, really enjoyed meeting you at Future Food Tech in San Francisco last month. And thank you for joining the FoodTech Stories podcast. I enjoyed our conversation.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us today on the latest episode of FoodTech Stories. Be sure and subscribe to our podcast on your favorite podcast platform and keep an eye out for our bi-weekly episodes. I'm your host, Megan Thomas, founder of Ladris 17. FoodTech Stories is edited by TJG Media.